Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my definitive video review of the new Samyang AF 85mm F1.4 Series 2 lens. And I'm actually filming this episode on the lens so you can get an idea of how it looks for footage in a setting like this. Samyang, which is also marketed as Rokinon, and so I get that question often. They're the exact same. If you're buying a Rokinon lens, you're buying a Samyang lens, and vice versa. But the Series 2 lenses from Samyang, which at this point include the 50mm F1.4 Series 2 that I reviewed earlier this year, the 35mm F1.4, which I'll be reviewing, and then also, though it's not really a Series 2, it's in the same kind of category, and that's the 135mm F1.8. And yes, you've been asking me to review that for a long time, and finally I think Samyang is going to send me one, so I should be reviewing that lens soon. But essentially, when it comes to particularly the 35mm and the 85mm F1.4, Samyang already had really excellent optical formulas at those focal lengths, but the lenses were held back a bit by the kind of immaturity of Samyang as an autofocus lens maker at the time of their release. So the Series 2 lenses, really, they leverage those existing excellent autofocus or those excellent optical formulas, and they package them in new and improved housings, and then also that have new features and better weather sealing, but also feature updated and much better autofocus systems. And so as a byproduct, we have a new lens here in the 85mm F1.4 Series 2 that is slimmer and lighter, along with having some other significant improvements. Those include having a better minimum focus distance and slightly better magnification, an improved autofocus motor that we'll talk about in today's review. There's improved weather sealing from 3 seal points now to 7 seal points, so more than double in the Series 2 lens. And they've also added features like their focus hold button and custom switch, kind of their contemporary features that they have, along with their new and contemporary design language, which we'll talk about in just a moment. First, however, a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Phantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
So as noted, this is a slimmer and lighter lens than the previous generation lens, giving it a little bit of a slimmer profile, but it is also, to my knowledge right now, on the Sony platform, which at the moment, this is only made for Sony FE, but it is the smallest and lightest of the f1.4 autofocus options available on the platform. So it is 83.4 millimeters in diameter, leaving a 72 millimeter front filter thread, and it is 99.5 millimeters in length. That's 3.3 inches by 3.9 inches. It weighs in at only 509 grams or 18 ounces, making it extremely lightweight for an 85mm f1.4 lens, particularly when you consider that on the DSLR platform we had lenses like Sigma's Art that were over 1 kilogram in weight, double the weight of this, and so it makes it a really lightweight option, more than 300 grams lighter than, say, the Sony G Master option right now. I also find that with this new design language that Samyang has, that it is more of an original Samyang look. I found that the first generation lenses, while I like the look of them, they did tend to ape Canon's L series lenses in their design language. But here we have got kind of new, uniquely Samyang design language, including a hidden red ring, a diamond type texture pattern on the focus ring, the silver accent, and then of course their custom switch and focus hold button that makes that for a uniquely Samyang looking lens. And I'm quite partial to the design language. I think it's clean and contemporary, and it works quite well. Now, with both the custom switch and then also the focus hold button, you can tweak the behavior of those things in the the lens manager software that they have, but it does require a separate accessory, which is Samyang's lens station. It's not expensive right now. It's actually $10 off at the moment I'm doing this review, so it's $50 US for it. So it's not a huge investment, but I would like to see Samyang maybe move towards having an integrated USB-C port on the lens itself, much like what Viltrox and Tamron are doing in their most recent lenses. I do like the feel of the new diamond texture and the nice wide manual focus ring here. It is fairly well damped for focus by wire, has pretty good precision, and you can also tweak the speed of the focus throw. If you leave it in its kind of native form, it is quite a long focus throw, but you can speed that, that function up in the lens station and using that software. There are 9 aperture blades inside. It does a reasonable job of keeping a circular shape when you stop down, but as you can see from the geometry, it's never quite perfect in terms of having completely round circles all across the actual whole frame. Minimum focus distance has been reduced down from 90 centimeters to 85 centimeters, and magnification has risen from 0.11 times to 0.12 times. There is an included lens hood and also a lens pouch. Neither is particularly special, but I'm certainly glad to have both of them as a part of this. As mentioned, we have shifted autofocus. Now on paper, it would seem like this is a step back. The first generation lens had a dual linear sonic motor, but in this current iteration, we have a single linear STM focus motor here. But the byproduct of the initial lens is that while it was a big step forward for Samyang, it still was imperfect in its execution. And so I found that I was still looking for more torque on the lens in terms of focus speed. And I also found that there were more micro pulses and focus inconsistencies with the original lens. So I did find it more stable when I reviewed it for the RF platform, which unfortunately Canon bounced, and it is no longer even available on that platform. What I find here is that while we have a single focus motor, focus speed is actually, if anything, improved, and certainly the stability and the accuracy of focus is improved as well. Focus speed for stills is very good, and I even shot some mild action, some basketball, and I had no problem keeping up with the action on the court in doing that. Focus pulls, when it comes to the video side, they are very well damped and they're smooth, but as you can see, they're not particularly fast. You'll also note that there is a fairly extreme amount of focus breathing there, and so if you're looking for a video lens where you're going to do a lot of big focus pulls, may not be the lens for you. It did a good job when I did the test with my hand of seeing how it would snap back to focus on the eye. It did a good job of that without any kind of hunting or pulsing. And I also noticed for stills that my focus accuracy was noticeably better than Series 1 lens. And so, for example, when it came to shooting portraits, shooting at f1.4, even with foreground objects in the way, shooting at a variety of heights and distances, I found that I had very good IAF performance, very accurately focused results. I don't think I came away with any that were not well focused, and so that certainly is a positive step forward from the Series 1 lens. I also found that this lens focuses quite well in low light. This shot of Nala, for example, is ISO 3200 and only 1/20th of a second at f1.4, so very dim lighting conditions. And yet I had multiple shots in this series. All of them were accurately focused, and I don't remember any kind of focus slowdown in that kind of dim conditions. And so while I would say when I used it side by side with the Sigma 85mm f1.4 DN, a lens that I own and really like, I found that I felt no difference in them in terms of focus. So that's a positive result really for both lenses. And until Sony replaces their G Master lens with their own Mark II of that, I would say that autofocus on either of these lenses is probably smoother and better than what the G Master lens is, though I fully expect that will be rectified. You know, for example, the 50mm f1.2 GM, when it came out, it had quad focus motors. I wouldn't be surprised to see Sony do something similar with their Mark II of the 85mm f1.4 G Master. And so that certainly will have, I'm sure, exceptional autofocus performance. But we can only say what we know at the moment. So I give them a positive result for really creating a focus system now that I feel is pretty much on par with the competition, which is saying something for a company that really only started doing autofocus about 5 or 6 years ago. So let's talk about the image quality. Now, I will note that this is the same basic optical formula from the Series 1 lens with a few minor tweaks. And one of those tweaks is that I found when using it side by side with the Sigma, I didn't really notice the typical Samyang warm tone to the actual optical glass in the lens. And so I do think that Samyang has managed to produce a little bit more of a neutral, although I still find it, nicely pleasing for colors and then also for my portrait work. But let's dive in and take a deeper look at the performance. I will follow this up with a direct head-to-head comparison with the Sigma, since I happen to own it and I can take that time to do that, and so that should be illuminating. But for the moment, I'll do a few minor comparisons just as a part of this image quality breakdown.
So first of all, let's take a look at vignette and distortion. Fortunately, Samyang has really gotten quite good at developing lenses that don't need a ton of correction, and the reason why I say that's good is that because, at least to this point, I have not seen in-camera profile support for Samyang lenses, either for video or for JPEGs. Now, in raw images, obviously it doesn't matter, but I took a look at the JPEG that came off of the same shot, and it looks the same, so there's no in-camera correction taking place. So you can see that there is an almost imperceptible amount of pincushion distortion and a bit of vignette. We'll take a look at corrections. So as noted, we have a really minimal amount of correction, just a -1 for the pincushion distortion. And then vignette, we have a +53, so around 2 stops of correction. Not enough that I really noticed it much in any kind of real-world shot, which is great. And I will note that this is one area of advantage for the Samyang over the Sigma. It has a fairly significant amount of pincushion distortion, very obvious without correction, and it has almost double the amount of vignette. Now, when it comes to longitudinal chromatic aberrations, they are not non-existent. You can see a little bit of fringing, but there's not enough there to really show up in real-world shots at all. Here we have really high contrast subjects, with high contrast transitions, and you can see that tiny bit of green fringing there. And as you look out here on the defocus area, a tiny bit of green fringing there. But looking at it at a global level, it doesn't really show up at all. And another case in point here, there is really very little evidence of that fringing. And as we look towards the defocused here, even with that slight bit of extra defocus, we've already basically lost that green transition, and so really not a significant issue. Now, I did see a little bit more of lateral chromatic aberration on my actual test chart, though I can't say it really showed up a whole lot in real-world shots. And so, and you're going to see this less because you might use it less as a landscape type lens anyway. But this is fortunately the kind that you can typically deal with just a one-click correction. So we'll take a look at our overall resolution and contrast. So this is going to be at f1.4. This is the Sony Alpha 1 I'm using for a test, so 50 megapixels, very high resolution, and also I'm showing you this result at 200%. So you can see that even under those extreme conditions, this is a very, very sharp lens in the center of the frame. You can see good detail, good contrast there. Mid-frame looks really quite excellent, and as we pan down, we can see as we move towards the edge that resolution really looks quite good even towards the corner. Now that looks exceptional until I show you a lens that is better still, and that is the Sigma 85mm F1.4. So in the center of the frame, what stands out to me is not so much a lot of additional resolution. There's not, but there is additional contrast there that shows up with just a little bit more pop in those textures. In the mid frame, the Sigma has an advantage. Now if we pan down here towards the corner, the Sigma, while it's a little bit brighter, you can actually see that the Samyang holds its resolution a little bit better into the extreme corner. So a little bit of an advantage there for the lens. But this is a very, very sharp lens. We can see here at f1.4 for a portrait shot, you've got lots of detail on the subject there, and you can see on the area where there's a very thin plane of focus there, very, very crisp end results, good resolution textures on her sweaters and on her hair, and so a very sharp result there. Another portrait type shot. So again, only f1.4, very shallow depth of field, but perfect focus as we talked about earlier, and then also really, really nice detail on the subject. Likewise, even shooting a landscape shot at f1.4. So I really actually liked the effect here. You could produce this kind of really strong defocus in the foreground to allow you to focus in on this tree. And even though it's a kind of a gray, moody scene, you can see that there is really, really good detail and contrast in all of those individual branches. And so it just gives a great looking result. And also in the shallow depth of field, that is there, you can see a very crisp end result. Then finally at f1.4, if we take a look at this shot, you can just see that really beautiful crisp delineation around the edges. There's no kind of that softness or, kind of indistinct edges, but rather we have really, really high resolution and acuity on this shot, and of course a beautifully defocused background. So stopping down to f1.8 does give you a boost in contrast, making it look more like the Sigma in terms of that performance. You can see that also here in the mid frame, and a little bit less in the corners. It's a tiny bit better, but you see it more in the center and the mid frame. By f2, you're starting to see really sharp corners here, and basically from f2 point on, this lens is just incredibly, incredibly sharp. You can see that resolution is just really fantastic there in the center of the frame. And if we take a look at some of these other areas, look at how crisp that looks. Just great detail that's being rendered. And right off here to the corner, we can see just really strong resolution there. If we stop back in with the Sigma, which I think is the sharpest 85mm lens on the Sony platform right now, we can see in the center of the frame that at f2.8, I would say that the Samyang is actually ever so slightly out-resolving the Sigma, but with a little bit of edge for the Sigma in the mid frame, and then down here in the corner, I still think there's a very slight edge for the Sigma, except for that last little bit there at the end where they are roughly equal, maybe a tiny advantage for Samyang. And over here towards the corners again, I would say that, the contrast edge is ever so slightly there for Samyang. So by the time you get to landscape apertures like f5.6, we're basically just maxing out the resolution chart in detail here. This is super sharp everywhere that you look. Just amazingly crisp. So that means for landscape shots, kind of returning to the scene of the crime here, you're going to see that the detail is just amazing, just incredibly crisp, great looking end result. Another shot here. And so you can see that as you pan across the area that is the plane of focus, the detail is just incredibly crisp right from edge to edge. So our minimum aperture is f16 here, and because it's not an incredibly small maximum aperture, diffraction doesn't kill things quite as much as usual, and so we see a performance that is pretty much on par with the wide open performance, maybe even a little bit better in the edges. And so I would say this is a lens that you can probably use without fear of diffraction messing things up too much. So as noted, minimum focus distance is 85 centimeters and magnification is only 0.12 times, which is improved, but not great necessarily. But the compensation is that we have a nice flat plane of focus. We have very crisp results, even up close. And so that allows the up close performance to be useful to creating shallow depth of field shots. So let's talk about bokeh for a moment. So obviously at its maximum, this is a lens that can completely blur out a background. And as you start to stop it down, things become a little bit more distinct. But you can see that the quality of the bokeh is still quite nice even as you stop it down. So that means you're going to really enjoy your shallow depth of field shots. You can see here that depth of field is tiny, but both the foreground and then the background bokeh is really lovely on this shot. Likewise here, I love the just stunning combination of really crisp contrast and sharpness results in the area focused, and then that beautiful defocus that you can see there. Here's a shot of Ferrari here, and so you can see nice and crisp detail and focus there, then a nicely blurred out background behind him. Coming indoors, here's a shot of Nala, and you can see that, again, nice detail there. And then as you look at the defocused area just of, living room type stuff, it is completely blurred away, giving this a unique and distinct look. This shot is at f1.8, but even stopped down a bit, you can see number one, that's to boost that contrast and a little bit more, which looks incredible. And then the defocus of the background is just really lovely. f2.5 for this shot, and so we started to get rained on, and so you can see that. Nice to have weather sealing in the lens, but you can see beautiful detail on the subject, and then a nicely blurred out background beyond. So finally, let's talk about flare resistance. I used a sun shower to do so kind of unique conditions, and so you see a lot of extra bokeh in the shot. So you can see with the sun right out of the top of the frame, I was able to produce some veiling down here. Now you might find that artistic and useful. Now when stopped, in this case, I'm just recomposed here to where the sun is in the frame, and I got a different look in terms of the metering of the warmth, so a much warmer look, but less of the veiling. Contrast, held up more here, and you can see that, the contrast is still there in the shot. If you stop down, like here is f11, you're going to get a little bit more distinct, a ghosting pattern, but overall, flare resistance is not bad for an 85mm lens. All in all, a pretty strong optical performance.
So at the end of the day, as you can see, this is a lens that offers a very compelling image quality performance. And one of the things that's very interesting about this lens is it comes to market with a price tag of right under $800 US. That compares quite favorably to the Sigma, which is basically $1,200 US. So it's about 50% less in price. And of course, if you're talking about the G Master, it's more than $1,000 cheaper than that. And so as a byproduct, if you're looking for a high-performing 85mm f1.4, this is certainly the value option. And the other thing I think that's interesting about Samyang's price point is that it's priced basically low enough that it also might pull in some competition from the 85mm f1.8 options. Whereas with the Samyang, you're getting a little bit more of a mature lens, obviously in terms of the maximum aperture. That's a little more compelling in terms of subject isolation, but you're also getting a more thorough weather sealing, a few more features here than what you would find on the competing 85mm f1.8 lenses. So I think that Samyang has a really good market position here as far as the price point. This certainly, while it's not a radically different, it's more of an evolutionary lens than a revolutionary lens for Samyang. I do think that it is evidence of Samyang's kind of design and development maturation coming into focus here and giving us a lens that is far more complete than its predecessor and really being quite compelling in that it has a great has a good autofocus performance. Now it has a great optical performance, but it also has that lighter and slimmer body than competing lenses, and of course that lighter price point, which all of us certainly welcome. So I do think that this is a really positive step for Samyang with this lens, and certainly those that are looking for a really high-performing portrait lens and you have a tighter budget, this is going to be a really compelling option for you. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review, also to an image gallery. I took a lot of photos with this lens, beautiful time of year, and this is one of my favorite type of lenses to use just for photography enjoyment. And so there's a lot of great photos there for you to check out. There's also buying links there if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. Linkage to follow myself or Craig on social media, to become a patron, to purchase channel merchandise, and of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.